I was not raised to believe that marriage was perfect. Since I was a little girl, I heard my mother say that living together meant having patience, that a man could have a good heart and still have a weak mind. But I also learned that a woman, when she has dignity, does not need to make a scandal to show who she is. I grew up with that planted inside me. And maybe that is why, on the day I discovered my husband had another woman, I did not scream. Not because I did not feel the urge. I did. I felt my chest burn in a way it never had. But in that moment, I understood that my response would not be given with rage. It would be given with truth and the calm he never expected from me. Are you curious to find out how it all happened? Then subscribe to the channel now and leave a comment telling me where you're listening to this story from. I love to know where you're following me from. And look, if I were you, I wouldn't miss what's coming up. The truth I'm about to reveal will move you in ways you can't even imagine. Are you ready? I remember well the day everything began to come to light. It was a stifling afternoon, the sort of heat that tires your body just by existing. I was sitting on the porch, mending a pillowcase that had ripped from so much use. I sewed slowly, thinking about the bills, about what I would make for supper, and about how he had been strange for weeks. He came home quiet, said he was tired, that work in the fields had been hard. I wanted to believe it. God knows I wanted to. But a woman's heart is a wise creature, and mine already felt that something was wrong. Then the neighbor, who lived 2 houses down, appeared. She had a troubled look, a tightness in her face I had never seen. When she called my name, my chest turned cold. I cannot explain why, but even before she said a word, I already knew sorrow was coming. And it did. She sat in the chair beside me and said she had seen me pass by on the road the other day, while he went ahead, riding the cart. But instead of taking the path home, he had turned into the property of the widow Clara, the one who lived beyond the creek. I wanted to say she was mistaken. I wanted to shut my ears and send her away, but I stayed silent, clutching the pillowcase in my lap, like someone holding on to the last hope. After she left, I sat there, looking at the yard and thinking about everything we had built. It was not just the brick house and the garden we had planted together. It was a whole life made of promises that now seemed hollow. I did not cry in that moment. There were no tears, only a silence so heavy it seemed to ache in my bones. I thought of standing up, running to the widow's property, asking at the door if it was true, but I did not go. Because I knew that if I went to ask, I would scream. And if I screamed, I would lose the only thing I still had left, my peace. That night, he came home with that tired face and pretended nothing had changed. He sat at the table, ate my beans, thanked me for the meal the way he always did. I watched his hands, thinking how many lies could fit into such a simple gesture. I did not say anything. I just observed, because first, I needed to understand what kind of woman I wanted to be in that situation. I could have chosen scandal, as so many would have. I could have thrown everything to the wind, chased him from the house, cursed his name until my voice gave out. But deep inside, I knew that was not my way. I had been raised by a mother who taught me that silence, when well used, has more strength than any scream. So I decided to wait. I waited until my heart stopped shaking. I waited until my thoughts were clear. And while I waited, I remembered everything he had promised me. I remembered our wedding day, the way he held my hand at the altar, the vows of faithfulness he made before God. I remembered the nights we shared the pillow, the children I carried in my womb, the harvests we worked together. Thinking of all that, I realized I did not have to lower my head. I had the right to look anyone in the eye, including the woman who thought she could steal my husband. The next morning, after preparing the coffee and feeding the hens, I washed my face, combed my hair, put on my clean dress, and went to her house. I did not knock at her door in anger. I did not curse. I did not cry. I only asked that she come out to the yard where no one could hear us. When she appeared, I saw she was trembling. I thought, she already knows she did wrong. And in that instant, I realized I had more strength than I ever imagined. Because she could not bear my calm gaze, I told her I knew, that I did not need any more details. I said she could keep her lies, but that I would not lower myself to the role of a woman who fights over a man. I told her I pitied her, because taking what does not belong to you is not courage. It is weakness. She tried to explain, but I raised my hand and asked for silence. I did not need to hear excuses. I only wanted her to see me standing, whole, without a single insult, and to carry that shame for the rest of her life. When I returned home, I felt a relief I cannot describe. I had done what my heart commanded, without cursing, without losing my dignity, and that was how I began to write the strongest chapter of my story. In those first days after learning the truth, silence was my only companion. I would wake before the sun rose and lie there, staring at the ceiling, feeling my heart beating slowly, as if it wanted to give up everything. There was a part of me that cried out for justice, that wanted to walk down the road telling everyone what he had done. But there was another part, even greater, that told me dignity lives in silence, that sometimes, when the voice goes quiet, the truth speaks on its own, and I decided to listen to that part of me. In my youth, I always believed that love could endure anything. I saw my father come home tired from the fields, my mother place his plate on the table, and swallow her tears when he did not say, "Thank you." I grew up thinking that being a woman was this, to endure, that we had to be strong enough to carry our pain in silence. But in that moment, sitting in the corner of the bed, I realized that enduring was not enough. I needed to understand what I would do with that discovery that seemed too big to fit inside my chest. I spent many days without telling anyone, not even my sisters, who had always been my confidants, not even the neighbors who loved to know other people's business. I did not want anyone's opinion. I did not want advice, because deep down, I already knew the decision would have to be mine, and that only I would know the right moment to act. He would come home and find me quiet. He would sit at the table and ask if everything was all right. I would say it was, because I did not want to start a war while my heart was still trembling. I needed to gather strength first. Sometimes I thought he must notice my different manner, that perhaps he suspected I knew. But he never asked anything beyond the usual, perhaps because he did not want to face my answer either. During that time, I withdrew inside myself. It was as if I had made a secret room in my chest where I kept that pain so no one could see it. I did all my chores every day. I washed clothes, tended the garden, baked the bread. But each task had another taste. It was as though the world had lost its color, as if everything had become just duty. And even so, I kept silent, because I felt that that silence was the only thing that still belonged to me. There was one afternoon when I went to fetch water from the well and saw my wavering reflection on the surface. I almost did not recognize myself. My eyes were hollow, my mouth drawn tight in a severe line. I thought, who is this woman looking back at me? It was in that moment I understood I could not let myself die inside, that I needed to find a way to exist without feeling ashamed of my pain. When I returned home, I sat on the porch and prayed in a low voice. I asked God to give me courage, not to scream, but to remain firm, because I knew anger passes, scandal passes, but what remains is what we do when everything seems lost, and I did not want to lose the good part of myself just because he had lost his way. The silence I chose was not cowardice. It was the time I needed so that hurt would not turn into poison. I knew that if I spoke before the right time, I would say words I would regret. Perhaps I would wound him in a way that could never be undone, and I did not want to carry another weight on my conscience. I wanted that when I finally decided to speak, it would be with clarity, with truth, with the calm of someone who knows exactly why she is there. In those days, I realized that a woman's dignity does not live in a quick response. It lives in the serenity of one who does not bow down. I was in no hurry. I did not need to prove anything to anyone. While he pretended everything was the same, I was building my strength in silence. And it was that silence that, later on, made him lower his eyes when the time came to hear everything I had kept. In the days that came afterward, it was as if every corner of the house reminded me of what was happening. I would walk down the hallway and look at the portraits hanging on the wall, the photographs yellowed by time showing our smiles, our little children, our anniversaries. Each image was a reminder of everything we had lived, and also of what I might lose, because betrayal does not only wound the heart, it threatens the whole story. I remember one morning when I woke before he did and lay watching him sleep. His face looked so calm, so unaware of everything that was happening inside me. I wondered how so much deceit could fit inside the chest of someone who said he loved me, and for an instant, I felt pity for him. Pity that he did not have the courage to be whole, the firmness to choose the right path. But soon the pity passed, giving way to an emptiness I had never felt. It was as though everything we had built was hanging by a thread. I thought about the house we raised together, brick by brick, about the nights we stayed up caring for sick children, about the Sundays when he would come home from the fields with calloused hands, and I would say I was proud of the hard-working man he was. All of that seemed small compared to the lie I now carried inside me. I wanted to believe that some part of it was still true, but in those days, I was not sure of anything. When I went out to the yard, I would see the vegetable garden I had tended with so much care and remember how he helped me carry the buckets of water. Every plant, every patch of earth seemed to ask me whether I was still capable of trusting. I would stand there, feeling as though my life had been stitched together with threads too fragile, because it took only one lie to unravel everything. Sometimes I thought about my children. I asked myself if they already knew, if somewhere in the house they had sensed what I was struggling so hard to hide. I did not want them to grow up carrying the weight of their parents' shame. I did not want them to look at us and see only deception. That was why I kept my silence and my routine, even though inside everything was in ruins. One evening, I sat on the edge of the bed and cried in silence. It was not a cry of anger. It was a cry of mourning. I was bearing the illusion that nothing could ever separate us. I understood that love, even the strongest kind, can grow sick if it does not find respect to stand on. And it was in that moment I began to think that perhaps I could no longer go on living in the same way. But at the same time, there was a voice inside me saying I could not give my dignity away so easily. I had spent many years building my life, not only with him but with myself. I had become a woman who knew her worth, and no matter how much it hurt, I did not want to allow his lie to take everything I was along with it. It was in that balance between sadness and strength that I spent those days. I would get up, set the water to boil, sweep the yard, tend the animals. And as I did all that, I was gathering the courage to decide how I wanted to continue. I knew I needed to look the truth in the face, but I also knew that when I decided to speak, it would not be to beg for anything. It would only be to say that I had seen everything and that, despite the pain, I still remained whole. I did not know for certain whether I would ever have the courage to face that woman. But there came a moment when I understood that if I did not look into her eyes, I would carry that question gnawing inside me until the end of my days. I needed to see whether she had regret in her face or whether she carried the pride of someone who believes she can take what does not belong to her. I needed to see with my own eyes what kind of woman is content with the scraps of another's love. It was on a quiet morning that I decided to go to her house. I woke before the light had covered the yard. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt my heart beating so hard it seemed it might leap from my chest. But I knew that if I did not go that day, I would never find the courage again. So I rose slowly, put on my blue dress that I kept for important occasions, and tied my hair back with the ribbon my mother had given me. I wanted her to see me dignified. I wanted her to understand I was not just any woman. I walked the dirt path with steady steps. Each step felt heavier than the last, but I kept going without looking back. When I reached the gate, I took a deep breath. Her yard was silent, as if the whole world was waiting to see what would happen. I clapped my hands only once, and I waited. When she appeared in the doorway, it took a few seconds for her to recognize me, and in that instant, I saw in her eyes everything I needed to know. She did not have the courage to look at me for long. She lowered her eyes, fidgeted with her hands, looked for a place to rest her gaze. I did not speak right away. I simply stood there, observing, feeling a calm I did not expect to have. Inside, my chest was heavy, but on the outside, I was nothing but steadiness. I did not want to humiliate her. I did not want to shout. I only wanted to show that I knew. When I finally opened my mouth, my words came out soft, but so clear, it seemed every syllable hung in the air. I said I was not there to fight, that I would not lose my composure, that I did not need to curse or point fingers at anyone. I was there only to say that I knew everything, that I was not a fool, and that I pitied anyone who chose to live off the scraps of another woman's love. She tried to speak, but I raised my hand. I asked her to let me finish. I said I had no interest in hearing justifications, that no excuse changes the truth. And the truth was that she had chosen to be part of a married man's lie. I told her that every night she thought she had won was, in truth, a night stolen from me and from my children, and that, because of this, I did not wish her the same pain I felt, but I was certain that one day she would wake up and remember my face, and then she would feel shame. When I finished, I did not wait for an answer. I turned my back and walked home. My heart was still beating fast, but I felt a different kind of peace. I had done what I needed to do, without losing my dignity. And that day, I discovered that sometimes the silence between two women weighs more than any scream. Many people, if they had been in my place, would have done differently. I know it well. I heard comments, heard the neighbors whispering that I was too meek, that a real woman was the one who stormed in and made the other's name into shame in the street. I heard everything in silence because each person only understands the weight of her own pain. I do not judge those who react with shouts and anger, but I, in that moment, chose another path. I decided everything I would not do. I did not tear clothes. I did not break dishes. I did not call anyone ugly names, though every single one of them came to the tip of my tongue. I did not tell the story to humiliate my husband before the whole town. I did not go knocking on anyone's door to create a scandal, because if I had done all that, perhaps the pain would have grown even greater. I did not want to lose the last part of me that was still whole. I also did not beg. That was another boundary I set for myself. I would never ask him to stay, to choose me. I would not crawl for a love that, in that moment, could no longer stand on its own. I would not lower my gaze, would not join my hands together pleading for respect, because respect is not begged for. Either a person has it inside them, or they do not. And if they do not, it would do no good to cry until I was dry. There was one night when he came home and found the table set as always. I served supper, sat across from him, and we ate in silence. It was in that silence I realized the worst kind of loneliness is not being without company. It is sharing a roof with someone who no longer meets your eyes. I finished eating, cleared the dishes, washed each one with care, and when I lay down, I felt that my decision was made. I would no longer waste my time begging for what should have come freely. I also decided not to take revenge, not because he did not deserve to feel the pain he caused me, but because I knew revenge would turn me into someone else. I did not want to fill my heart with bitterness. I did not want to be remembered as the woman who lost herself in rage. I wanted to be remembered as the one who knew how to carry her pain without turning everything to ruin. Perhaps my choice looked like weakness in the eyes of some, but to me, it was the most courageous act of my life. It was like getting up after a fall and walking with my back straight, even if my legs still trembled. That was how, in those days, I discovered that there are things we do not to change the other, but to protect what we are inside. That is why I decided not to make noise. I decided not to return things in kind. I decided not to stoop to the level of someone who preferred lies. And deep down, I knew this hurt him more than any scream I could have given. Because my calm showed him that he had lost something he would never get back, my respect. Many people think that only shouting can leave a mark on someone who has hurt us. I learned it is not so. There are words we say without raising our voice, but they carry such a weight that the other person will never forget them. I discovered this on the night when, at last, I decided to say everything that had been locked inside my chest. It was a hot night, one of those when the air feels heavy even to breathe. I prepared supper as always. I placed the food on the table, arranged the cutlery, served the plates. He arrived with that same look of habit, pretending there was nothing out of place. I sat across from him, and while he ate, I realized my heart was calm. It was not the calm of someone who had forgotten. It was the peace of someone who has decided never again to accept anything halfway. When he finished the meal, I cleared the dishes and washed everything slowly. Each plate I washed felt as if I were also cleaning away what I no longer wished to carry. Then I dried my hands on the cloth and returned to the table. It was there that I spoke. My voice did not tremble. I said I knew, that I knew every step, every lie, that I needed no one to confirm anything, because my heart already knew the truth before any confession. I told him I had looked into her eyes and had seen the regret he himself did not have the courage to show. He lowered his gaze, and in that instant I realized that my calm hurt him more than any scream would have. I went on. I said I did not hate him, that I wished him no harm, but that from that moment on, he would never again have my respect. And more than that, He would never again have the privilege of being loved by someone who could give everything without asking for anything in return. I did not need to accuse him with foul words. I did not need to point my finger in his face. My words were simple, but each one carried the weight of truth. I told him that while he hid behind excuses, I was discovering that I was stronger than I had ever imagined, and that it was this strength that made me rise from bed every day without needing to beg for anything. He tried to interrupt, but I asked him to let me finish. I said I would not make a scandal, that I would not tell the neighbors, that I would not tear up any photographs, because the greatest punishment was not my fury. It was him knowing that I saw exactly who he was, and that even so, I chose to be at peace with myself. When I was done, I did not wait for a reply. I rose from the table, went to the bedroom, and closed the door. In that moment, I felt I had done what needed to be done. I had said everything without losing my dignity, and I realized there are words that, spoken calmly, are stronger than any scream, because the truth, when it is clear, needs nothing else to impose itself. After the day I went to her house, and after the night I told him everything, life went on outside as if nothing had happened. The sun kept rising, the roosters kept crowing, the neighbors continued their talks at the gate. But inside me, everything had changed, and I soon realized, in the first weeks, that inside her it had changed too. It did not take long for me to see that shame had taken up residence in her eyes. When I walked along the road, sometimes I saw her coming out of the yard or tending clothes on the line. Before, she lifted her chin and pretended confidence. Now, she lowered her gaze, fidgeted with her hands, shrank her body like someone who wanted to disappear. I never had to say a word. My silence was heavier than any accusation. It was then I understood there is no greater punishment for someone who chooses to live in a lie than to face the eyes of the woman who was wounded but did not lower herself. I carried on with my life without scandal, without gossip, without fights. And even so, she seemed to carry a guilt that grew heavier every day. There was a morning when I met her on the path to the store. I was coming back with my basket of provisions, and she was coming in the opposite direction, a scarf tied around her head, and her steps hurried. When she saw me, she stopped suddenly. I kept walking with my head high, without turning away. As I passed her, I heard her breath catch in her throat. In that moment, I realized she already regretted everything, because regret does not live in words. It lives in the heavy silence that comes when there are no excuses left to give. Some people came to tell me that she would say, in a low voice, that she never meant to destroy anyone's home, that she felt remorse, that she did not know he would go so far with the lies. I listened and did not reply, because by then, no explanation mattered to me anymore. I did not need her to confess to me or to anyone. What I needed, I had already achieved, to keep my dignity whole. And it was in that time I discovered there is a kind of strength only a woman who has been wounded knows. It is the strength of someone who does not allow herself to be dragged into bitterness, of someone who understands that, no matter how grave the offense, it is always better to go on in peace with oneself than to spend a whole life trying to wound back. I did not wish that she would suffer what I had suffered, but I did not pity her either. I only looked and thought that everyone carries the burden of the choices they make. And if there was one thing I knew, it was that from then on, she would always remember the woman who went to her door, said everything with firmness, without shouting, without cursing, and walked back home with her head held high. And that memory would be, for her, a mirror hard to face. When I think back on that time, what hurts is not only the betrayal itself. What weighed the most was looking at him and no longer seeing the man I once admired. Because a woman can forgive a failing, can learn to live with a hurt. But when respect goes away, there is almost nothing left to hold a life together. And that was what happened between us. I still remember the way he lowered his eyes the day I told him everything. I spoke calmly, without raising my voice, but each word I said seemed to press down on his shoulders. He tried to explain, then tried to pretend it was not so serious. He said it had been a mistake, a weakness, but the more he spoke, the more I felt that any feeling that had once bound me to him was dissolving, because I could see he did not have the courage to fully own what he had done. In those days, I looked at him and saw only a small man, small in courage, small in truth, small in his ability to respect the woman who had shared a life at his side. It did not matter that he kept coming home, sitting at the table, sleeping in the same bed. Inside, he was no longer the same. Or maybe he always had been, and it was only I who had never truly seen him. I asked myself how he could pretend for so long, how he could walk in through the door and hug me, knowing he carried lies in his arms. I thought of all the times I had trusted his eyes, and I felt foolish. But it was not only foolishness. It was also the trust of someone who truly loves, who never expects to be deceived. There was one night when he tried to touch me as before. I pulled away. He did not understand, or pretended not to. I said that from that moment on, nothing would be as it was, not out of revenge, but because my heart was no longer the same, and if I chose to pretend nothing had changed, I would be betraying myself. It was then that I discovered it is possible to share a house without sharing a life. He was still there, but I felt that my love for him had turned into something else. It was not hatred. It was a kind of compassion, mixed with distance. I looked at him and thought that deep down, he was a weak man, and that if I remained at his side, it was not because I lacked the courage to leave. It was because I needed time to understand who I was without him. I know many did not understand my choice, but only someone who has lived an entire life beside another person knows that nothing is as simple as it seems. I did not shout, did not cast him out, did not destroy everything, but I never again saw in that man the husband I once respected, and that was the quietest and most final loss of all. Many people think a woman's strength is measured by how loudly she shouts, by the anger she shows, by the dishes she breaks, by the scenes she makes. I used to think that way too when I was younger. I believed a brave woman was the one who never accepted anything in silence, who let all her fury out and made the other repent in front of everyone. But at that time, when everything fell apart, I discovered another kind of strength, a strength that makes no noise, but lifts you up from the inside. I discovered I was strong on the first morning I woke up and no longer felt afraid to look at him. I discovered I was strong when I managed to say everything I needed to say without losing my composure. I discovered I was strong when I walked to her house without trembling and came back knowing that my worth did not depend on anyone. It was during that time I realized that, despite all the suffering, I still had something no one could take from me, my dignity. It was not easy. There were days when I cried so much I thought I would never have the strength to get up again. There were nights when my pillow grew heavy with so many tears. But each time I thought of screaming, of turning my pain into a spectacle, I remembered the woman my mother had been. I remembered the steady way she faced hardships, without losing her head, without losing her kindness, and I thought I wanted to be like that too. I wanted to be able to look at myself and feel proud. That was how I learned there is a different kind of courage in a woman who chooses silence. Because silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is simply the decision not to waste more energy on someone who does not deserve it, not to return the offense, not to lower yourself to the level of lies. When I understood this, my heart felt lighter. I did not need to prove anything to anyone. I could see the neighbors curious, waiting for me to make a scandal, for me to throw everything out, to shout the truth at her door, to lay all my pain bare. But I did none of that. Because I knew my greatest triumph was not to make them feel ashamed in front of everyone. It was them knowing that, even so, I carried on with my head held high. And that was what I did. I got up every day, cared for my house, did my work, treated people with the same courtesy as always. And each small gesture was a silent declaration that I would not be destroyed by anyone's deceit. I might have been betrayed, deceived, but I would not be diminished. It was in that time I met the woman who had always lived inside me, a woman stronger than I had ever imagined, a woman who, despite all the hurt, knew her worth, and who did not need to shout for everyone to see it. Today, so many years later, when I sit on the porch and look out at the yard that witnessed everything, I feel a peace that back then I never imagined would one day come. I know that anyone who goes through betrayal believes the pain will live in their chest forever. I thought that way myself. I believed that the emptiness which opened inside me would never again be filled. But time is a good teacher. It shows that there are pains that do not disappear but instead change their place. They stop being open wounds and turn into memories. And memories no longer rule over us. Many people ask me why I never told everything to the neighbors, why I did not insist on exposing him and her, on washing the dirty laundry in public. I answer that I did not do it, because I knew I did not need to prove anything. I knew who I was, I knew what I had given in that marriage, and I knew that, in the end, they would always remember my silence, because it is easy to forget the shouting, but it is very hard to forget the calm gaze of someone who was wounded and still remained standing. I am not saying everything became perfect. It was never the same again. What he destroyed could not be repaired. I went on living beside him for a time, but love turned into something else. It became respect for myself before any other feeling. I stayed there because I needed to understand what I wanted for my life, and it was in that silence that I found myself again. I learned to look at myself differently, to see that the woman I was not small nor naive. I was simply someone who loved truly, and who, because she loved that way, had the courage not to become bitter. Because that was my greatest victory, not letting his lie turn me into someone I did not want to be. When I think of that other woman, I do not feel hatred. I feel a calm sadness, like someone looking at a path she will no longer take. I know she must still carry the weight of the choice she made, and I do not need to wish her any harm. Each one carries what they plant, and I planted dignity. If there is a lesson that remained from all this, it is that we do not need to lower ourselves in order to win. I made her regret it without ever cursing. I showed my husband the man he had become without needing to humiliate him. And above all, I proved to myself that my peace was worth more than any revenge. Today, when I close my eyes and remember the woman I feel proud. I was whole. I was sincere. I was brave. And that is why, even having been betrayed, I can say that I came out victorious, because true victory is this: not losing yourself. If you liked Grandma's story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you can hear more stories like this and share them with other people who might be inspired by this story of overcoming. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a similar situation? How did you react? A kiss on the heart from all of you, and until the next story.